All right, yo, it's Concepts with Kimbler. Um, Today I'm going to talk about the the levels of talent, or maybe gaps in levels of talent in mixed martial arts, um, and the reflection of it, or the observation of it. I just went to Nashville 2 weeks ago and watched Corey Sandhagen versus Rob Font. Kind of getting to see UFC fighters live and in person, as compared to the television, and observing that and applying it to thinking about gaps and levels in talent. All right, so I guess to put it into context, when I'm talking about the gap or the level in talent, if you think about if you played any sports, or if you ever listened to an athlete talk about something as they progress, even at the smallest levels, say take football or basketball, and you have a student in 8th grade and they're playing in junior high, or they move up from 7th grade to play in junior high, and you might hear them say the game's faster. Then they move up from junior high up to senior high, from 9th grade to 10th grade. They'll talk about the game's faster. And the game never changed. It's just the players, they're quicker, they're better, they're faster. And you'll hear it all the time from high school to college. Like, athletes gets interviewed in any sport, and they're like, what's the biggest difference you see from high school to college? And they're like, the game's so much quicker. Everyone's faster. That's what I'm talking about. All right. So when I would watch, say I go, and I'm not trying to sound boastful or anything like this. This is making this observation. You kind of have to view it from above and separate yourself from being anybody and just accept reality for what it is. So say I spar, like, I think that I'm good at striking, all right? And say I go with people in my area that I believe are good at striking, and then I video it, and then I watch the video. The last time I really was doing this a lot, I would say we were slower than what I was seeing when I was watching UFC. And I also made this observation when I would watch local shows. I would see a local show, and it just looks like the punches aren't as quick. They're not as quick coming out, coming back. And maybe the feet, there's not as much movement going on. Whether it's speed or volume, probably a little of both. It seems like it's lesser. And I would say, like, that's a gap in talent. Well, that was probably a year, maybe two. Actually, it would have been like 2 years ago when I really started seeing that and talking about it. But I hadn't been to UFC in person. I'd only watched it on TV. So over the past 2 years, I kind of got away from videoing myself and whatever. I like to video myself when I'm running out of things to work on, like, and I need some new ideas, something fresh to keep my mind going. And I hadn't been doing videos as much. Over the last 6 months to a year, watching more local shows on television, like, I wasn't able to make it to a couple friends' events, so I watched the stream. I didn't see as much of a gap watching it but I could see a gap in the speed and everything. There was still a gap, but I didn't see as much of a gap as compared to watching a live stream of local fighters that I know. I can't say if a local card had 20 fights and I had 5 fighters I know, well, those 5 fights is what I'm talking about. I can't speak for the other people or someone with their very first fight that's from 3 states away. That's not what I'm including in this. But those 5 fights didn't look that much different in speed or volume than the UFC. Maybe slightly, definitely slightly, but not as astronomical as I would have said 2 years ago. Now, and I do need to clarify, I love striking, so I'm mainly talking about striking. I can't give you the solid analysis on grappling. Like, but we're gonna continue on. Watching the UFC immediately live within 2 fights, I was like, man, they're not quicker. They're not quicker than us. And I'm saying us kind of as a unison of, like I was saying, if I feel like I'm a good striker and I work with a good striker in the area, there's several good strikers in the area. It's just kind of everyone sort of levels up in a way together. And it's kind of how everyone's doing it. That gap in speed and shit wasn't there anymore. Nor was the volume. That maybe different things lead to that. But I know personally, I took an interest in volume a long time ago. I feel like my arms should function like my legs. And if I can walk all day, I should be able to punch all day. That's a whole different video. But as I'm watching these fights progress through the night, I'm like, man, it's not that much different. This isn't anything I would be scared to do. I don't feel out of my league. Now, I'm making these assumptions on the prelims too. So like, 3 or 4 fights in, I'm not deep in the card. But still, they're UFC fighters. All right. Something else I'm noticing, they're leaving the octagon 15 feet in front of me, 20 feet in front of me. Like, I mean, if I leaned over this rail, I can touch them. And they're slapping hands with people. Like, I'm in that spot where they walk away and they're slapping hands. None of the... There was one guy, I think it was Durden, looked extremely physically just crazy. And there was another one too. There was another one because his back was just crazy. But other than like 2 guys on the entire card, I did not see something I would think was a physique of it I was impressed with. It was a physique I'd seen and performed with and against 100 times, if that makes any sense. It wasn't anything intimidating. No one was super big other than light heavyweights, which are 240 pounds, cutting weight down to 205. That might be a drastic cut, but you get what I'm saying. They're going to be a lot bigger than me, so they're going to look bigger than me. But even them, like, they didn't have these huge muscles or whatever. I really think the camera and the TV does a lot. I could definitely see how they influenced the audio. Like, you couldn't hear the boos as loud as they were, except at certain moments when I watched the actual feed of the UFC show back. But something else I've been thinking about the last 2 weeks, I've been thinking about this video. If you watch professional wrestling like WWE, when they do a body slam, so say they pick someone up and they go, huh, when that body comes down, that camera angle switches like perfectly right when they connect. Like if the camera's right here, right when it hits, it's over there. And it's like you're blinking. So if they have a not so perfect hit, you don't quite catch it. Your brain doesn't register it. That same thing is going on when we're watching UFC. There's, I believe, 4 cameramen standing on these posts around the octagon. And there's like 3 that they're running up from the bottom and they can like look through the cage. And then you got 1 or 2 on these things above it that are, I don't know, remote controlled. They're not drones. They're like on these poles, but they can go anywhere. They can like get the whole crowd and everything. These shots, when I was watching fights back, so I get to watch it in person, and then the next night I'm back home and I'm re-watching it on television. The way the angle changes, it creates so much more volume in our heads. Watching the angle of the camera, your brain's having to register so much. And I can't quite get the words to make it perfect, but I specifically was watching fights and I was like, man, it seems like this is a fast pace. When I was standing there watching it in person, I was like, yo, why isn't he throwing more jabs? And I started thinking about the camera. The camera just keeps moving. So that was really interesting. And again, I'm not saying that to be boastful or anything. It's just the sport of MMA itself is still in the infancy. Like, I can't stress it enough. This was completely illegal when I was a kid. The way I first saw MMA was a 2020 episode where they were trying to permanently ban it and John McCain was calling it human cockfighting. In 2016, I think they just legalized it in New York. Like, that was 6 years ago, 7 years ago now. We're still, and think about in football, when the quarterback, think about in football or baseball, when the quarterbacks and whatever were still working regular jobs at stores and everything to pay their bills. That's happening in fighting right now. Not even a month ago, I was reading an article about a guy who had 10 UFC fights under his belt and was working for DoorDash to pay the bills and didn't have enough money for surgery. Like, the sport isn't figured out financially yet. It's not figured out physically yet. It's not figured out marketably yet. There's still so much to it all that the gaps are small. The gaps are so small. The gap from being, and think about this, if you're a fighter and you're watching this, after 3 amateur fights, you're pretty much in a different level. Even though you're still an amateur fight, 3 amateur fights, you can usually see it. Not everyone. Some people need longer. Some people get in there and whatever. They're comfortable. Once you've gone to that next level, you're only in that level for a little bit, and then it's time to be pro. And then the pro levels is like this area of the country against this area of the country. But the best of either ones is ready for the UFC. I don't know how to make it quite make sense, other than as long as you keep doing it and keep honing the craft, you're going to get there. Where here's the difference. In NFL, they talk about that 40 speed all the time. Like, he runs a 4.340. I don't know what fast is. I can't remember. But I guarantee the difference that they judge it is a single second, probably more tenths of a second. And that is how small the gap in talent change level is. Because the sport's been around for 100 years now, where ours has been around for 10, 15, 20. We can say it's been around longer. Football was around before the NFL. You get what I mean? Like, I don't know. That was really interesting. So on a positive note, if you're a fighter out there, no matter where you are and what you're doing, if you just keep doing it and keep perfecting what you feel works for your body, the gap's not that far. It wasn't faster. None of the strikes looked crazy strong or powerful. Nothing hit harder than I thought it would. The leg kicks looked just as snappy as I've watched pros in my local area do. It was cool though. It was positive. It was positive in a way, like, wow, we can all achieve that. And then there was a little downside of don't quite have that hero-ness to look up to now. Like, it's like when you walk amongst, you don't have anything to look up to in a way. So there's a little downside of that, but for the most part, I'd say it's positive. Because even if you got to the top of the UFC, the sport's so in infancy, you can continue to grow the sport itself. And that's cool. And that's pretty much what I love, is just advancing things and finding new things in the sport. But yeah, I just wanted to share that. I thought it was cool that it just didn't seem like there's that much of a gap, at least in what I see in like professionals in my area or high level in my area. I'm mainly focused on striking, but even the grappling, I recognized everything that was going on. There was 1 or 2 guys that was really, really fast on the ground. But I mean, there's 1 or 2 guys I've seen that are really fast on the ground locally. This is just, I don't know. That was cool. Anyways, Concepts with Kimbler. The gaps and the levels of fighting and talent, they're not as big. They're not that big. Not as big as we'd think in other sports.